Well, everyone, it's a new year, so we get to finally talk about some other older products and see how they hold up in this specific year. Now, for the iPhone 11, easily one of my favorite iPhones of all time, and luckily for you, if you still own this product, you are probably still going to be in a very good situation if you keep this iPhone the rest of this year. Now, I'm going to be probably as thorough and detailed as possible. This review, if you're watching this, 7 months from now, 8 months from now, hopefully it's still kind of up to date for the most part. But after owning this iPhone since day one of launch in 2019, it's been pretty much holding up very, very well. Apple just discontinued this thing in terms of selling it in their retail stores last year, not even like a year ago, about 4 or 5 months ago from now. And that was kind of a sad situation, to be honest. They never replaced this iPhone at that price tag either. So this kind of was one of the last $499 iPhones for the time being. Now, if you want to pick up one of these iPhones, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there. You can help support the channel at the same time. Now, on the outside, this iPhone still is holding up fairly decently. It is starting to kind of show its age now that we have like 3 new iPhones after this thing with OLED displays. So this thing does look a little bit outdated in terms of the panel, but the design still looks fairly decent. And that's one thing that I do look at, and I'm actually kind of happy about this phone in that standpoint. The fact that it may not be the most, it's not the most expensive phone anymore, so you can kind of understand that the panel isn't necessarily going to be the most expensive one either. You still have Face ID on this thing, which is really nice. You have the lightning port at the bottom, no headphone jack or USB-C or anything like that. We kind of know that by now. It's kind of obvious. And on the back, we have our standard glass back, which looks very good. It still looks and feels like a very premium phone for the most part. You'll have that dual camera setup as well. You have wireless charging, you have IP certification, and overall this phone still feels very premium for a, kind of budget tier phone, which it was in 2019. And now that it's aged, you can probably find this phone all over the place for like less than $300, probably closer to $200 and $250 for the most part as well. Now, some things I also want to throw in here in terms of how this phone compares to, the latest iPhone 14s. I think in the body standpoint, it is very close. I mean, you can feel the iPhone 11, you can feel the iPhone 14, and although the iPhone 14s do have flat sides, they feel very similar. And as long as you, don't crack your iPhone 11 or anything like that, you probably won't feel like you have a super outdated phone in that standpoint either. Now, in terms of the, cameras, we do have to kind of hit on these things. I feel like these phones have very good cameras for how old they are as well. So with the iPhone 11, you have a 12 megapixel wide angle lens and then a 12 megapixel ultra wide camera as well. Now with these phones, like I mentioned for many years now, the fact that you do have those dual camera setups is way better than having just one camera setup. And that is something I've talked about heavily. As long as you do get more than one camera, you are in a really good situation. Now you still have 4K at 60 on the back of that camera. You also have 4K at 60 on the front as well with that 12 megapixel wide camera. So in that standpoint alone, that is another highlight in my opinion. Having a phone like this, which gives you such good quality photos and videos, is very good. And especially if you're using, applications like Snapchat or Instagram or TikTok, whatever video platform you're using, they are fairly optimized for iPhones anyway. So this camera is actually pretty decent. As long as you're in pretty good lighting conditions and everything, you should be good to go. Now, I will say on top of that, if you're trying to compare this thing to like an iPhone 14 Pro Max, clearly the 14 Pro Max is going to be better. This thing still has portrait mode and everything, but you are missing features like cinematic mode. You don't have stabilization mode. You don't have like Pro RAW or anything like that, but you still have a fairly good camera. And pretty much for everything I need to do in a day, pretty much everything I need to do in my life, this camera would be more than enough. It's missing a telephoto lens, which is kind of sad, but otherwise it's still holding up fairly well in the camera standpoint. Now in the, moving on from that and hitting on the software and the features and the longevity of this phone, it's tough to tell how long this phone is going to last. I would probably assume this phone is probably going to end up lasting, I would say another 2 or 3 years easily. Because this thing came out in 2019, I would kind of argue the average lifespan of most iPhones is probably around 5 years. So we're getting into that like kind of the 4th year plan. So I would probably say maybe 2025 or 2026. That's when this iPhone could see its last update. It really just depends on what Apple plans on doing. But some really good news for the iPhone 11 in particular is that Apple has done a really good job at giving a majority of the features of the last 2 software updates to the iPhone 11. So what I mean by that is essentially Apple's been kind of doing some weird stuff and they've been kind of stripping away features on like certain iOS versions and only giving them to the, maxed out iPhones. And then the second tier iPhones like the iPhone, like a year ago, it's not getting as many features than the year from that before that, they're not getting as many features. But I do think Apple is kind of, with at least the iPhone 11, they've given this iPhone a lot of features within iOS 16. It still didn't get every single little tiny feature, but for the most part, a lot of the features within it came within this iPhone, which is a pretty good touch. So I think that standpoint, you're still going to be getting software support for quite a bit of time. So at least for the whole entire duration of 2023 and 2024, you are still going to be getting a supported iPhone, which is a really nice thing. So from that standpoint alone, that's kind of another highlight on this iPhone as well. Now, next up, we have the performance segment. Now, with the iPhone 11, you are getting that Apple A13 Bionic chip inside of this phone with 4 gigabytes of RAM. Now, some key things to keep in mind. I think this iPhone for that A13 Bionic is still a pretty good chipset. It's not the most, up-to-date chipset by any means, but it's still holding up fairly decently. And I think that's another thing going for this phone. If you wanted like the most expensive phone of all time, or the best performing phone of all time, well then you're going to have to spend more money. That's usually how it goes. But if you're buying something like an iPhone 11, you kind of know how the performance is going to be. I'm trying to think of some good examples of why this chipset is still kind of fairly recent. The best one I can think of is that the iPhone 14 still has the Apple A15 Bionic chip, which is only 2 generations newer than this thing. So it's not like this phone is severely outdated in that standpoint either. And I've done tons and tons of speed comparisons between this iPhone and basically all the iPhones after this one. And although this one is definitely slower, it's not like a significant difference, and I don't think I would upgrade from an iPhone 11 to like an iPhone 13 because of the performance. Maybe the iPhone 14 just because it does have a little bit more RAM, but otherwise, I think the performance of this thing still holds up fairly well. If you're playing massively heavy intensive games like Genshin Impact or PUBG or Call of Duty Mobile, you're still going to be getting a really good performing phone from this thing too. And especially nowadays, you can change the graphic profiles of those games. So if the game runs slow, you can just tune down the graphics and it should run a little bit better. So that's kind of another advantage going for this phone as well. Now finally, in the battery life department, this phone has a 3110 mAh battery. And from every battery test I've done, it's definitely been great when I first got it. Now that we've kind of been using it, the battery's degraded a little bit, and that's just very common. That's very natural with all phones. I don't think that's a reason to not pick up this one anymore, but do keep in mind, if you're going to an iPhone 13 or an iPhone 14, you will probably see a significant increase in battery life. So definitely keep that in mind. And at the end of the day, I think the iPhone 11 is still completely worth it for sure. This is a very good iPhone. It has a ton of capability built in. And I would say if you have something like an iPhone 10 or an iPhone 6S and you're wanting to upgrade, really going to an iPhone 11 I think is a no-brainer. I think it's a really good iPhone. If you have a little bit more money, I would probably recommend going up to an iPhone 11. If money is not an issue, go for the iPhone 13 or 14. But regardless, this is still a great phone and it's going to be supported here for probably another few years. So that pretty much covers it up. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.